are a snake which was not created by nature. You and the boss. You are from another world. A world that I do not wish to know. Go and do battle with him.
Frank Jaeger. The man who you destroyed was my brother and my only family.
No.
Dr. Hunter altered Fox Dye's program just before the operation, but no one knows how or why.
Now I'll show you the power of the weapon that will lead us in the 21st century.
Pure energy.
Here I am in silence, looking round without a clue. I find myself alone again, all alone with you. I know I could break you down, but what good would it do? I could surely never know that what you say is true. Here I am in silence, it's a game I have to play. You and I in silence, with nothing else to say. I wanna know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I wanna know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
Did that do it?
Nice try, Snake! Die!
Hurry! Get away!
Great Fox!
A name from long ago. It sounds better than Deep Throat.
So it is you.
You look terrible, Snake. You haven't aged well.
I'll send you back to hell!
Fox, why? What do you want from me?
I'm a prisoner of death. Only you can free me.
Fox, stay out of this. What about Naomi? She's hell-bent on taking revenge for you.
Naomi?
You're the only one who can stop her.
No, I can't.
Why?
Because I'm the one who killed her parents. I was young then, and couldn't bring myself to kill her too. I felt so bad that I decided to take her with me. I raised her like she was my own blood to soothe my guilty conscience. Even now she thinks of me as her brother.
Fox.
From the outside, we might have seemed like a happy brother and sister, but every time I looked at her, I saw her parents' eyes staring back at me. Tell her for me. Tell her that I was the one who did it.
There you are!
We're just about out of time. Here's a final present from Deep Throat. I'll stop it from moving.
Fox!
In the Middle East, we don't hunt foxes, we hunt jackals. Instead of foxhounds, we use royal harriers.
Fox!
How strong is that exoskeleton of yours? Snake, are you just going to sit by and watch him die?
cornered fox is more dangerous than a jackal.
Destroyed the radome.
Impressive! You are indeed worthy of the codename Fox, but now you're finished!
No! Fire the stinger!
Fox! Can you really shoot? You'll kill him too!
In this, the final episode of Existence, the legacy of 1998's Metal Gear Solid, I wanted to conclude by bringing things back to the concept of multiple realizability. We've covered quite a lot in these past 14 episodes or so. After kicking things off with a brief look at the making of MGS1, we turn to the question of how the game responded to its peers at the time. This not only heightens the immediacy and dramatic thrills you feel while playing, it blurs the line between you and Snake, between activity and passivity, story and gameplay. And the real-time 3D does this by its consistency of the level design's physical dimensions, which are conveyed and displayed through the dynamic camera angles. Then, its wider decades worth of context. According to the International Panel on Fissile Materials, quote, "It is widely accepted that spent nuclear fuel and high-level wastes require well-designed storage for periods ranging from tens of thousands to a million years to minimize releases of the contained radioactivity into the environment." But after overviewing the development of digital society from the end of World War II to the start of Desert Storm, we tried then to analyze even deeper in terms of MGS1's philosophical underpinnings. We discussed the problem of free will in video games, determinism, existentialism, and betrayal. We discussed the pre-programmed logic of nuclear proliferation, the way our world resembles by way of MGS1 that of Orwell's 1984, and we looked at how the game's many late-stage twists and subversions speak to its rebellious, even iconoclastic spirit. All that's left to do is provide the through line for all these things, namely, the room MGS1 leaves for the player as part of a medium with more than one solid shape. A medium, in other words, defined precisely by its nonlinear, multiple realizability. What is nonlinearity? Multiple realizability is pretty similar to the idea of nonlinear gameplay. Nonlinear in this instance refers to the idea of there being more than one way to meet the requirements for progressing forward. If we look at, say, Super Mario Bros. 3, for example, there are certain constants and certain variables for nearly every single level. The magic of Mario is how many of these variables apply to how you, the player, approach gameplay, specifically in terms of which power-ups you save or farm, when you decide to use them, and how you go about applying them to a level's design. So what's multiple realizability? Well, it's something related, but it's also something a bit deeper. We've already discussed somewhat the concept of multiple realizability, but here's an overview just in case. In the Japanese version of MGS1's intro, did you know there are subtle differences in the cinematography from the English one? There are also a ton of minor differences like this throughout the entire game, some of which are purely contextual. As one random example, both versions, English and Japanese, begin with this little jingle. But only Japanese players at the time would have recognized that it, not to mention the character Meryl and the name Dave, were all pulled straight out of MGS1's predecessor, which never debuted in the West, Policenauts. Multiple realizability has to do with the player's underlying and ongoing sense of reality, and how that perception is interpreted. What makes MGS1 truly the first game of the 21st century is it used multiple realizability to convey something truly empirical, even experimental, about the concept known as the hyperreal. Just by leaving key elements to the player rather than to the director, elements like, say, the binoculars or the first-person camera or the codec, MGS1 allows for a contextualized, emergent sense of reality to generate out of your input entirely beneath your notice. The more you play, the more this hyperreality solidifies, becoming a unique life experience that belongs to you and you alone, and in this regard, transcends language.
There's no need for words, Snake.
It becomes an experience of a pseudo-world that feels as real as one scene in a film, yet also one that you took part directly in conceiving.
It's useless, I told you. I can read your every thought. Now I'll read more deeply into your soul. I can see into your mind. So, you like Suikoden? So, you like Azure Dreams? You like Castlevania, don't you? You enjoy role-playing games. I see that you enjoy Konami games. Kojima 作品が好きなようだな。
いつも応援してくれてありがとう。
A big case in point here, of course, is the big reveal at the very end, specifically the one about the Genome Soldiers.
Sleeping late as usual. A snake.
Liquid, you're still alive.
I won't die as long as you still live.
Too bad. It looks like your revolution was a failure.
Just because you've destroyed Metal Gear doesn't mean I am done fighting.
Fighting? What are you really after?
A world where warriors like us are honored as we once were, as we should be.
That was Big Boss's fantasy.
It was his dying wish. When he was young, during the Cold War, the world needed men like us. We were valued then. We were desired. But things, are different now. With all the liars and hypocrites running the world, war isn't what it used to be. We're losing our place in a world that no longer needs us. A world that now spurns our very existence. You should know that as well as I do. After I launch this weapon and get our $1 billion, we'll be able to bring chaos and honor back to this world gone soft. Conflict will breed conflict. New hatreds will arise. Then, we'll steadily expand our sphere of influence.
But as long as there are people, there will always be war.
But the problem is balance. Father knew what type of a balance was best.
Is that the only reason?
Isn't it reason enough for warriors such as us?
I don't want that kind of world.
Ha! You lie! So why are you here then? Why do you continue to follow your orders while your superiors betray you? Why did you come here? Well, I'll tell you then. You enjoy all the killing. That's why.
What?
Are you denying it? Haven't you already killed most of my comrades?
That was...
I watched your face when you did it. It was filled with the joy of battle.
You're wrong.
There's a killer inside you. You don't have to deny it. We were created to be that way.
Created?
Les enfants terribles. The terrible children. That's what the project was called. It started in the 1970s. Their plan was to artificially create the most powerful soldier possible. The person that they chose as the model was the man known then as the greatest living soldier in the world.
Big Boss.
But Father was wounded in combat and already in a coma when they brought him in. So they created us from his cells, with a combination of 20th century analog cloning and the super baby method.
Super baby method.
They fertilized an egg with one of Father's cells, and then let it divide into 8 clone babies.
Then they transferred the clones to someone's uterus and later intentionally aborted 6 of the fetuses to encourage strong fetal growth. You and I were originally octuplets.
Octuplets?
Yes. The other 6 of our brothers were sacrificed to make us. We were accomplices in murder before the day we were even born. So it was you and I, 2 fertilized eggs with exactly the same DNA. But they weren't finished yet. They used me as a guinea pig to create a phenotype in which all of the dominant genes were expressed to create you. I got all of the recessive genes. You took everything from me before I was even born. But you and I aren't his only children.
What?
The genome soldiers. They too are his progeny, carrying on his genetic legacy. But they're different. They're digital. With the completion of the Human Genome Project, the mysteries of humanity were laid bare. Thanks to Father's DNA, they were able to identify more than 60 soldier genes responsible for everything from strategic thinking to the proverbial killer instinct. Those soldier genes were transplanted into the members of the next generation special forces. That's how they became the genome soldiers. That's right. The genome soldiers that you've been killing are our brothers with the same genes as ours.
The genome soldiers?
That's right. They are our brothers, created artificially through the alignment of nucleotides to mimic our father's genes. They too are the product of numerous sacrifices.
Sacrifices?
Human experiments! 1991, the Gulf War. The military secretly injected soldiers with the soldier genes. The Gulf War syndrome that hundreds of thousands of returning soldiers complained about was a side effect of it.
Ha! Everyone knows that the Gulf War syndrome was caused by exposure to depleted uranium used in the anti-tank rounds.
That was just a cover story issued by the Pentagon. First they tried to say it was post-traumatic stress disorder, then chemical or biological weapons. The poison gas detection units and the anti-sarin injections, they were all just a cover-up of the secret genetic experiments.
So then, the so-called Gulf War babies that have been reported by Gulf War veterans are...
Yes. They too are our brothers and sisters.
So the genome soldiers mean that the experiments were a success?
Success? Don't be a fool! They're a complete failure! We are on the verge of extinction!
What?
Have you ever heard of the asymmetry theory? Nature tends to favor asymmetry. Those species which have gone extinct all show signs of symmetry. The genome soldiers suffer from the same problem, signs of symmetry. So do I. As do you. That's right. We are all on the verge of death at the genetic level. We don't know when or what type of disease will occur. That's why we need the old man's genetic information.
You want Big Boss's DNA so you can save your family? It's very touching.
In nature, family members don't mate with each other, and yet they help each other to survive. Do you know why? It increases the chance that their genes will be passed on to a new generation. Altruism among blood relatives is a response to natural selection. It's called the selfish gene theory.
You're telling me that your genes are ordering you to save the genome soldiers?
You can't fight your genes. It's fate. All living things are born for the sole purpose of passing on their parents' genes. That's why I'll follow what my genes tell me. And then I'm going to go beyond, in order to break the curse of my heritage. And to do that, first, I will kill you.
None of this was real, neither in the game's world nor in our own, and that speaks to the wider theme that we looked at last time of how MGS1 portrays you. But yet, experiencing it all still mattered. Something about it was realer than real, both for you and for Snake. This is the epitome of hyperreality, and in the end, the specific shape that solidifies hardly matters to the question of what it really meant. How many of the enemy force did you kill in your playthrough? Were you a careless man or a coward, as Mantis says? How well did you withstand Ocelot's torture? Give in and Meryl dies. Stay strong and she lives. But at the end of the day, these questions and aspects to the story don't matter in the sense that they change very little. As Fox says, it makes no difference. Not in any real sense.
Snake, we're not tools of the government or anyone else. Fighting was the only thing I was good at. But at least I always fought for what I believed in. Snake, farewell.
But they still matter to you, the player, to your experience of MGS1. They matter quite a lot. These details are your mark on this world, the mark that proves you exist, that you are a causal force, that you ever lived at all. According to a very controversial principle in quantum theory, states of matter do not come fully formed into existence in all their particulars prior to our observing them. And once observed, only so much can be observed at one time, can be quantified at once. The same arguably is true, or at least attempted by, MGS1. By the time you make it to the end to see whether Meryl has, like Schrodinger's cat, lived or died inside her box, you have already determined to some extent the outcome. Meanwhile, there are many other aspects which remain fixed. Like a tragic play, a novel, or a film, you cannot change them. One of my favorite examples here is how no matter what, you can't pull the trigger on Gray Fox. Like Snake, the player gets forced to just watch him die, slowly and painfully. Acting out, in real time and through gameplay, the tragedy of this scenario. But there are even aspects for which we can't be sure of, one way or the other. How much, for example, did Liquid know about Gray Fox before killing him? Was Fox talking most of the time to Solid Snake, or on some level to his phantom, Big Boss? Where did Big Boss end and his terrible children begin? Who was really the recessive gene clone, and who the dominant one? And where all along did the loyalties of characters like Naomi, Ocelot, Campbell, Mei Ling, and Liquid really lie? Did Liquid not perhaps save Snake because he could not bring himself to destroy his only remaining direct family member by blood? No, his twin? Or was it all, as Liquid hints, part of some twisted attempt at revenge against the dead Big Boss by proxy? Whatever the case, MGS1 is a game full of ghosts. In fact, the name Psychomantis derives from the psychomantium, a mirror device from parapsychology used either literally or symbolically, depending on your interpretation, to channel the spirits of the dead. Just like it doesn't really matter whether objectively those who use the psychomantium are really returning to visit with the phantoms of their pasts, it doesn't really matter which of the many, many different possible paths and interpretations you or I take while playing MGS1, and whether or not they are objectively or definitively real. This is a game that anticipated our social media age to some extent, in terms of how distinguishing reality from illusion has hardly been much of an obstacle in determining whether or not an existent belief is experienced as eminently true. Human beings aren't machines, not, it seems, even clones with near virtually identical nucleotide pairs. Regardless of the text of your corporeal form, MGS1 uses both story and mechanics to argue that this is not the complete story of who you are, because we are all more than just one long string of A, T, G, Cs. At bottom, we are human because we are our minds, and inside there is a private, dare I say, phantom realm, where the past is never even past, as William Faulkner said, where the dead keep living as memes, and the living can imagine things which objectively either no longer or do not yet exist. In the end, it's up to you to decide what the experience of playing MGS1, let alone of watching this retrospective essay series, means for you. Because right or wrong, real or imagined, it is you and others like you who decide the meaning of your and their existence. Even if there's such a thing as fate, even if it's preordained to end in tragedy, only the human mind can have the power to decide how it's all interpreted, how to understand it, how it's to some extent controlled. MGS1 was an incredible experience and piece of artistry, craftsmanship, and digital design. It set into stone, so to speak, the next several decades worth of so-called AAA games, at least in terms of their outward aspects, their phenotype, their collective face. But what isn't set into stone before experiencing the game is how it all fits together, and most of all, what it all means. 70% of this series has been Hideo Kojima's 1998 legendary PS1 game, filtered through the mind and body of your humble narrator, medium, and guide. The remaining third or so? Well, boss, that's entirely up to you. There are many different shapes it could take, multiple versions it could realize, so I leave the final bit, the final triumph, to you. Thanks for watching, and whatever you do, promise me one thing.
You mustn't allow yourself to be chained to fate, to be ruled by your genes. Humans can choose the type of life they want to live. The important thing is that you choose life, and then live.
Yes. Yes, they bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. They all think this was the end. No one realizes that I still have more to say. No, I mention nothing of the Patreon page we're building. All is going according to plan. Soon we shall have over 1,000 subscribers, and then the world will be ours for the taking. What? Another one? A sequel? Made nearly 20 years ago. But very well. I might not live to see the results. That's why there's no time to waste. I'll get to work right away, Mr. President.